Welcome to the 5-Year Plan podcast. Real quick, before we get going, we're going to tell you about our partner at Redcon One. They're an online one-stop shop for all of your supplement needs. They have everything from whey protein to MRE Light, which is an animal-based protein powder. They have meal replacement shakes, vegan protein shakes. They have protein bars, total meal replacement shakes. They have pre-workout ranging from our favorite with Total War, which is a pretty high caffeine pre-workout, all the way to stimulant-free pre-workouts and pump products. So if you're doing some arms or some glutes to impress your gym crush, you're going to want to take that pump product. And regardless of your dietary preferences, Redcon One has you covered. They have keto-friendly supplements, vegan supplements, and anything else you need.
Redcon One, baby.
All right, enjoy the show. Get the fuck out of here.
Ugh.
You're fucking gross.
I'm stanky.
Right. Yikes. Anyway,
Was the first crop top or yikes?
it's the first crop top podcast.
Or yeah, there we go. I was gonna say crop top, but I'm done.
Yep.
I'm done.
Done talking. Zach is done. Anyway,
Anyways,
so I told Jesse when we went to the Bears game on Saturday, and I told her this. I mean, we're recording this Wednesday after. This probably won't go out till after the Bears game,
Next game.
their second game, which is fine. And went to the game against the Dolphins, and I told her before. I said I'm not gonna overreact. Whatever happens, I'll be fine. She knows I'm an irrational fan. So we're leaving the stadium, and I look at her and I go, I don't want to overreact, but I mean, we're fucking winning the Super Bowl. She was like, I'm done with you. It's literally 3:00 and I'm done with you.
season hasn't even started yet.
No. Justin Fields did look good though. I thought that was promising. So I'm excited to see him get some more reps this week against the Bills too. That's going to be an interesting storyline. Trubisky is coming back, playing at Soldier Field for the first time since our last game of the season last year.
That's crazy.
Where we lost our way into the playoffs.
Yeah, fuck you, Trubisky. No,
I like him. He's a good dude. He just wasn't a great quarterback, but wish him the best over in Buffalo.
Kind of like Jay Cutler.
I think Jay Cutler's a funny ass dude. He was
Right.
Similar thing. It was kind of bittersweet at the end, where it's probably time to go, but you just it's weird.
You hold on for too long.
You get an emotional connection to these players, which is really weird because they have no idea who we are.
Yeah. I fucking love you, man.
I know.
No, it's the same thing with the like, and here's me justifying.
I mean, Kellen Mond looked like shit.
He had that one drive before the halftime.
Mm-hmm.
It was all right. But then here's how I look at it.
He can run.
Right. I always tell people, the Vikings sat 30 players. All of our star players did not see the field. But at the same time, like, depth is what's going to get you far in the playoffs and for a Super Bowl push. These guys, they need to show off against these number ones, because if they come into the game during the regular season, they're not going up against backups. You need these number twos and number threes to be able to hold their own against these ones. Where I just looked at, I still can't even fucking remember this guy's name. Our other quarterback, not Kellen Mond, like Bollinger or something like that.
Yeah, Bowler. That's gonna bother me.
Look it up. But like, he'll take it on a 3-step drop. He's like holding onto the ball. He's got a receiver doing a quick slant or a quick hitch route, and the guy got separation, but he holds onto the ball for that extra split second and just doesn't trust his instinct to throw it. And a receiver went from open to now there's a pick six. And it was fucking frustrating. I was sitting there, Forrest was like trying to sleep, and I'm like, don't yell, don't get mad. I'm just sitting there, I'm like, it's fucking preseason, but figure your shit out.
We need to get you a meditating app, huh?
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I was watching, so our starting offense was terrible. Our first 5 possessions were 3 and outs. Our first 5. Justin Fields' first 2 possessions were 3 and outs. But we got in really shitty situations. We had penalties, negative run plays, and, it's when it's 2nd and 12, 3rd and 12. What are you going to do? But I felt like once he got comfortable, he started doing better. He had a throw that was almost picked off, and then the next play, he scrambled and it was 3rd and 12. and he tried to spin and then he fumbled. So like almost a ball that should have been picked and then a fumble. It was like 2 bad plays. But what was really encouraging is then the next drive, we had like a minute on the clock, and he let us down to get a field goal before the half and had some really nice throws through that drive. But even his missed throws were still good throws, and we didn't really see that from like Trubisky. Like Trubisky, he'd miss guys wide open, and it was good to see a guy that throws a really good ball, even when it's, our receivers were, people say, oh, he's going against the second and third stringers. He's like, yeah, who do you think he's playing with? Second and third stringers. And these receivers can't get any separation from the defensive backs. And Miami has a good defense. And their corners made some really good plays on some of those balls that he threw that were incompletions. But those balls were not catchable by the defense. And that was really good to see his ball placement. I was really impressed. And he's just fucking fast. Like, that guy can fly. He ran like 20.3 or 0.4 like miles per hour. He was the 3rd fastest player clocked that weekend.
Jesus.
So I'm excited for that.
But that's the thing, like, especially with rookie quarterbacks in preseason, you don't need them to go out and just be an absolute star. You don't want them to fuck up.
Yeah.
Like, it's those little, take the sack, throw the ball out of bounds.
Yep.
Like, it's those little things there that you don't want to fuck over a drive because you make a dumb play.
Yeah.
Take the loss, get it back on the next one.
Yeah, and I think another thing they probably look for, too, is not making the same mistake twice. Or if you do, like, making better mistakes,
Fuck up better.
Yeah. That quarterback on the Vikings, his name is Rhett Bomar. Whoever they signed. I thought they had a different guy.
It's a different guy.
I thought so, too. That doesn't seem right. I want to look at their depth chart here.
Jake Browning.
That's who it is. Where did he go to school?
I want to say like Michigan. I'm pulling that out of my ass.
I think he's a second-year guy or something like that. You said Jake Browning?
He played college football for the Washington Huskies.
Okay.
We signed him as an undrafted free agent in 2019.
Okay.
So they were actually super high on him. As of before that last preseason game, at least, he was ahead of Kellen Mond.
Really?
And after the interview, Zimmer tore him apart. And he came on and he was like, yeah, I expected better of myself. That was kind of his shot because Kellen Mond is going to start this Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll probably get the majority of the reps. And then I think Browning will come in and finish the game.
And what's up with Cousins? Is he still in the COVID protocol right now?
No. So with there only being 3 preseason games, Zimmer wants to find out who's going to make the team. So he's like, you guys already got the starting position. I'm pretty sure they'll come in probably in the 3rd game maybe.
Yeah.
Even if it's for a drive or 2. I don't think Justin Jefferson will because he's been dealing with a shoulder injury.
Okay.
So I don't think he'll get any preseason reps. But
yeah, Matt Nagy, the Bears coach, he got ripped apart for not playing his starters at all in, I think it was 2019. It was the year after they just went to the playoffs, and we lost against the Eagles on the double doink. And he didn't play like any of the starters in training camp, and then they just sucked, and we went like 8-8. It was not a good season, and everyone was like, well, probably should have fucking given your starters some reps in preseason. And I'm not sure how much maybe it has something to do with like having a bad start to the season, but that shouldn't cause you to have a shitty season throughout the whole, 4 months?
Yes and no, because like this was a handful of years ago when the Packers were like 13-3. First round bye, they rested all of their starters, I think week 16 and or 17. Or for sure week 17, maybe week 16. And then they had the bye week. So a lot of these starters didn't play a snap of football, like game football, for like a month. And they came in first week of the playoffs that they played and got blown out. So you could argue the bad start, but football's all about momentum.
I think it's one of those things where if you sit all your starters and then you look amazing in the week after, people will be like, because it's the same thing, right, as a bye week, essentially, right? You get a bye week, and after you get that bye, the idea is that you're fresh and you feel better, you're a little bit more well-rested. And I think that's one of the things where, let's say you sit your starters in the preseason, and then they stay healthy through the whole season, they play really well, then it's genius, right? But if it doesn't work out, then you're an idiot. It's one of those things.
High risk, high reward.
Yeah, like they'll tell you it was smart or dumb depending on the outcome.
Yes.
It's kind of like if you see a player who's like kind of falling as they're going for a catch, and it hits them in the hands and they drop it, you're like, dude, you gotta catch that ball. But then if they catch it, it's a highlight on ESPN.
Greatest play ever.
Yeah. It's always easier to say they should have caught that when we're sitting on the couch. My dad and I say we're really good armchair quarterbacks because we'd always critique Trubisky. We'd be like, I'm the fucking best armchair quarterback in Chicago.
Well, fuck you, Trubisky.
Oh, man. I like him, man. I don't a lot of Chicago Bears fans just talk so much shit on him. They still talk about it on Twitter. I'm like, dude, the guy's a Bill now. Like, it doesn't matter.
It's the same thing with Cousins. There's a lot of people in Minnesota that fucking hate him.
He's still on the Vikings, though. There's Bears fans that are still talking on Trubisky. He's gone.
That's true.
It's weird. Imagine you guys, you don't re-sign Cousins, and Mond is your starter now, or you draft another guy, and people are still talking shit on Cousins. You'd be like, why do you care?
Fucking move on.
Yeah, I think he's fine. He's got his money. He's all good.
He's fine. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's living life.
His kids won't have to work if they don't want to.
His kids won't have to work.
And yeah, no kidding.
Quick side note. Do you have Zyn?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Some cinnamon on me right now.
We're going citrus cinnamon combo.
That's interesting. So let me know how that pans out.
This is what I do. This is my coffee in the morning.
Yeah. All right. Take that. So there was something I wanted to talk about. One of our questions that we got last week. It was about the squeeze versus the stretch for hypertrophy. And something I was thinking about that we didn't touch on was the mobility improvements from training in a full range of motion. And while that doesn't directly improve hypertrophy, I think there's something to be said about having more mobility and how you just feel. A lot of research shows that most of the mobility stuff that we do, like, think of, cat and cows, T-spine rotations, and different stretches, like they don't do as much for mobility and flexibility as we think. I should say this, stretching long-term for a long time definitely improves your flexibility. Anyone that's stretched for an extended period of time sees that. But a lot of the long-term joint mobility exercises we do, they're not always effective. Those, just really any mobility exercises we do, they're not always effective, and sometimes we might not know exactly why they're effective. And this is why I think it's good to be evidence-based, that we have, research that we base most of our decisions off of. But there's something to be said about anecdote and just seeing things work, right? So for me, stretching my calves, I get better range of motion in my deep squats, right? But what does better than stretching my calves is squatting deep, right? So I cramp up less in my calves when I am squatting or split squatting heavy in a full range of motion. My calves are something that they used to always cramp when I was swimming, and I had really tight calves. And the more I started squatting, the less I started to experience those things, because I'm pushing my dorsiflexion and my ankle so far when I'm trying to squat ass to grass, because my knee has to go forward. And that's something that you get from getting the full stretch in your exercises, is you're doing what we call loaded mobility. So if you do a body weight squat, you're not going to be able to get as deep as you can if you do like a goblet squat, right? And so when you train in the full range of motion, you're going to, over time, see long-term improvements in your mobility. So I think that's another thing that is super important that we didn't touch on. And part of that too is because the question was about hypertrophy. But if you can really own those bottom positions of a squat or a dumbbell bench, maybe you don't have the mobility to get all the way down to the chest. Maybe you see the shoulders kind of like round forward or come up to the ears as you get lower. Over time, if you focus on getting a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, then you're going to notice that your muscle starts growing even a little bit more. You're going to see a little bit more enhanced results. And on top of that, you're just going to feel better.
All right. Well, and I want to touch on the mobility versus the stretching, because a lot of people put more emphasis on stretching than they do mobility. when it comes to owning a movement, you need the mobility, stability, and then work on the movement patterning. If you're only stretching a muscle and you're not adding that intention of creating tension at that end range of motion, I'm not going to sit here and say you're increasing your risk of injury, but you are essentially getting into a new range of motion that you don't have control in. So stretching's not bad, but if you can add some intention and, okay, we're gonna do ankle mobility. Let's stretch out the calf muscle, but now let's focus on trying to lift the toes off the ground and strengthen up that anterior tibialis muscle, the opposing muscle, create a bunch of tension down there. So you're getting into an end range of motion and you are strengthening up that end range of motion, because we get injured when we get into a range of motion we don't have control in. When it comes to like squatting, ass to grass, or even as low as you can go, and like bench pressing, trying to come down all the way to your chest, I think it's like when you train in a specific range of motion, you get benefits. I think it's like 15 degrees outside of that range of motion. So if you can't squat ass to grass, or you can't bring a barbell down to your chest, going as low as you can control, kind of pausing, trying to create tension at the bottom, over time, you will start to be able to get lower and lower because of that. I don't even know what the term is for that, but that effect of
like motor learning.
Yeah, of that 15 extra degrees that you can't get into, but you're still reaping the benefits from that.
Oh yeah, and I think what's funny and slightly annoying at the same time is when you bring that up to some people who are like very evidence-based. They're like, well, just squat deeper, or do this or that. And you're like, well, instead of doing mobility exercise, they're like, oh, we'll just use a full range of motion, right? Some people can't, and it's not necessarily because they physically don't have the ability to, but your central nervous system can make it really difficult to get into certain positions, because what happens is if you've never had a bar on your back when you're squatting and you try to squat ass to grass right away, you might get 3/4 of the way down and then kind of start getting psyched out, and then you come back up and you tell yourself, oh, I can't get deeper. We have a lot of built-in defense mechanisms in our body, and we have to. These are important. It's been a part of evolution since history of mankind. And like a built-in defense mechanism, you get towards the edge of a cliff and you start getting those butterflies in your stomach. That's telling you, hey, chill the fuck out. Don't run too fast by that edge, right? Because otherwise you fall. Your built-in defense mechanisms are also what keep your head on a swivel when you're walking around busy traffic, right? It helps you survive. And so your body, when you have 300 pounds on your back, obviously if this is your first time squatting, you won't have that much, but your body is like, it's kind of almost in fight or flight mode when you're hitting really heavy squats. And so you're going to have a really hard time getting yourself into that bottom position because you've never been in that position with weight on your back before. So it takes time. So sometimes it is just like, hey, you got to squat more. But I think one of the biggest benefits to me in like mobility training, especially FRC, functional range conditioning, a lot of the work that they do and a lot of the FRC principles and methodologies, I think those are so helpful because they just help you create tension in that body. Like most people, when they have like knee valgus in their squat, for those of you that don't know what that is, it's when you see the knees cave in a ton on a squat. Sometimes if it's just really minuscule, a lot of times people mistake that for knee valgus, and it's actually just internal rotation of your thigh. But when you get knee valgus, a lot of times what happens is you either kind of collapse on the arch of your foot, or you kind of lose tension in the bottom of the squat. You get down to the bottom and you just kind of relax there, or you kind of bounce up uncontrolled. Like a bounce out of the bottom of a squat's good if you can control it, but a lot of people can't. And so when they bounce out of the bottom, the knees kind of cave in. It looks shitty. Or you see people when they do a dumbbell bench, they come down here and it's just like a kind of just bounce back up. But you can tell if someone has tension in their chest at the bottom of a dumbbell or barbell bench versus just bouncing it up. And an analogy I like to think of with a bench press is almost at the bottom, you should almost feel like if you were to try to do a push-up and you were trying to hover your body like half an inch off the floor. That's kind of the tension you should have in your chest at the bottom of a bench press. Or when you're squatting, when you're at the bottom of a squat, you should feel the same tension in your legs as you do when you're at the bottom of a leg press. Because if you relax your legs at the bottom of a leg press, that weight's coming right fucking down on you. So I think the biggest thing is that being able to create tension in those end ranges of motion and not just kind of chilling down there.
Well, I just think people use mobility as an excuse for why they're not squatting ass to grass or even below parallel, whatever it may be. But I mean, I blow people's minds. You know, I'll see them squat and they're like, oh yeah, no, I'm just super tight. I can't do it. And I'm like, okay, lay down on the ground, get on their back. And I'm like, don't use your hands, but pull your knees into your chest as high as you can. Point your toes up to the ceiling and I'll take a picture of them and I will show them the angle. Their knees are above their hips.
Yep.
You know, they are in a full ass to grass squat. They don't have the stability with weight on their back. So now is, okay, what can we do? How can we help you create tension and get that comfortability of, you know, the more times you're around that cliff, the less butterflies you're going to get.
Yep.
You have to build that comfortability of like, this is okay. I'm not going to get hurt.
Yeah. And that just goes to show, like, it's not like we're saying just do a bunch of mobility work and you're good. We're saying do some mobility work, but continue to squat, because a lot of people, a lot of trainers like to say move well and then move often. And I would argue that you have to move often to move well.
And that was the thing. When I was training those hockey players right when I graduated, we'd have these 7th and 8th graders coming in, you know, going through puberty and not really knowing how their body moves in space. And I'd be taking them through these workouts, and I'm trying to make sure everything looks perfect before we move on. And after like the second or third day, the guy that I was interning for sat me down and he was like, listen, these kids do not know how their bodies move in space right now. Our job is to teach them that. What I want you to do is tell them, show them what they're going to be doing, let them do one set, and then pick one thing for them to focus on. He's like, it's not going to be perfect. They're 13, 14-year-old boys that just grew 6 inches in the last year. Like, they don't know how to move. Teach them how to move. Let them figure it out on their own. And I'm like, that's it. Until he said that, I'm like, that fucking makes sense. Like, when I learn something new, it's not going to look perfect, and I'm okay with that. But every single set, I was talking to one of my clients today about this. Every single set, even when I'm squatting, I'll video it. How did that look? What can I do to make that next set even better?
Yeah. And the other thing too is, like, a lot of times people want to, like, trainers want to throw like 3 or 4 things at someone right away. And I've been guilty of that too. But a few years ago, what I started doing was, instead of starting someone off and have them do, like, you know, in their first session, maybe you're doing like 3 sets of squats, and I'm just going to tell them everything about the squat, what they need to do, what they should focus on, all this stuff. And it overwhelms them. And then it sucks, right? So now what I'll have them do literally anywhere between 5 and 10 sets of squats, but the weight is really light, it's really manageable, and we're training really far away from failure. Because in this first session, we are not training for hypertrophy or for strength gains or anything like that. We are practicing a skill, right? Of telling your body what to do and actually carrying out that task. So with squatting, I literally tell my clients, all right, I'm going to put this bar on your back, and you're going to push your knees forward and your butt back. Think about sitting down on a toilet. And then they'll do like 5 reps. I'll tell them, all right, now I want you to think about spreading the floor apart, right? And then if their knees are coming in, right? If it's a little bit like hingy and there's more hips going on, and I want a little bit more quad in the squat, I'll tell them, hey, I want you to push your knees forward on the way down and sit your butt right on top of your heels. Some people come way up on their toes, their heels come off the ground, and for them, I tell them, hey, I want you to straight up like sit back, like you're trying to sit on a chair, and then it looks a little bit better. And there are like certain cues in a movement. Like if I tell someone to press through their heels that already has a good squat, they might now start getting too much into their heels, and they're getting a little bit more glute, and it turns into almost like a low bar squat looking motion. That cue wouldn't be good for them, right? So whatever cues you use are going to depend on what that person needs. And so if you just throw a bunch of shit at the wall and say, hey, I want you to think about this, and this, it's not going to work out very well. Something that a business coach of mine said a few years ago that always resonated with me, and I think this applies to training too, is I had like all these things on my to-do list that I wanted to get done that day. And he said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have no priorities. So I think the same thing for an exercise, but I say 2. If you have more than 2 cues in your mind, you don't have any cues in your mind. You're just thinking about too much shit. So what I like to do is I'll have 1 to maybe 2 things that I'm going to tell my client or myself during a movement. And this is so helpful because when you're pushing really hard in a set, pretty much the only thing you're thinking of is, I need to get this fucking weight up, right? It's like going up to hit a baseball. When you go up for an at-bat, if you're like thinking, okay, I got to keep my back elbow tight to my body, be short to the ball, hit the inside part of the ball or whatever, you're gonna just thinking about too many things. When you're up to bat, it's too late to be thinking about your swing. You need to be thinking, all right, this pitcher's been in a rhythm. He's going first pitch fastball the whole game. He's been throwing me away. So I'm going to sit on a fastball away and I'll adjust to the slow pitch inside. And that's what you do, right? It's all strategy from that point. You're not thinking about your swing or your form or whatever. Just go up and fucking show and go, right? Because you've already done all the prep work. And your warm-up sets is when we're thinking, all right, let's get these cues going. Let's get feeling good. Kind of groove that movement pattern. And then when you get to your working sets, you should have done enough work in your warm-up sets to be like, all right, like, let's fucking go. But a lot of people don't do enough warm-up sets to get that benefit of, cueing yourself into good positions and then not having to think about anything when you're squatting or whatever the movement is.
Well, I think squatting's the easiest one to talk about because there's so much that goes on in a squat.
Those and deadlifts are the easiest to fuck up.
Yes. And that's the thing. Like, when you have a lot of weight on the bar, you don't want to fuck up. Like, that's when injuries occur because, again, you get outside of a range of motion that you have control in and something slips, something pops. If you can that's what I always say, take the warm-up sets like they're heavy. Mm-hmm. I want you to make 135 pounds. I want you to make it feel heavy. Slow control, feel it where you're supposed to feel it, act like it's heavy weight, and then when you get to your heavy sets, treat it like it's lightweight. You've done this before. You know what to do. Mm-hmm. Just get the fucking weight up now.
Yeah. I go back and forth between whether I think it's actually that, like, if an injury happens, a lot of times I don't think it's because they didn't have control in that specific range. I think a lot of times it's like, hey, you're really strong with half reps, and it's not that you can't control the bottom position, but you can't control it with the same weight you're doing half reps with, right?
Right.
And I think it's really interesting too when you look at like form and injuries. There's not as strong of a correlation as we used to think. We used to think like, oh, if you round your back on a deadlift, you're gonna pop some shit in your back. And I've seen people hurt themselves deadlifting, but I've seen people hurt themselves deadlifting when their spine looks pretty neutral, right? And so it's a lot about like tolerance. And here's the thing with what you're saying is they don't have a load tolerance, the same load tolerance in that maybe bottom third of the squat as they do in the top third. And so if you're going to pick a weight that's challenging in a deep squat, you have to pick a weight that you actually can control in that bottom range. And it's going to feel kind of easy. Like, it should feel easy once you get up past 90 degrees, because that's when you have the least amount of tension on your glutes and on your quads, because you're really strengthening your glutes in that lengthened position in the bottom of a squat. And so once you get up like past parallel, you see people like really struggling through a squat, and right when they get up past 90 degrees, they kind of like shoot up. And so some people are like, oh, that was easy. You're like, no, you had like maybe 1 rep left in you. You just thought that last part kind of flew up, and it did, and it should.
Right. Well, like with the rounding the back with the deadlifting, I've seen plenty of people round their back for 10 plus years, but they're strong in that range of motion, and they have that load tolerance. Load tolerance was the term that I was looking for, because like when I'm squatting, when I learned in high school, it was you drop down as fast as you can, you catch the weight at the bottom, and you explode up. So I didn't have that. Was it load control? What's the
You like well, I would say more that wouldn't even, you have the load tolerance, but you just weren't controlling the whole movement. For strength, that's great, and if you're playing football, like that is kind of better. But if you're training for hypertrophy, you probably want to have a little bit more control out of the bottom. You probably don't want to bounce because you are getting more of a stretch reflex out of the muscle than you are force output through a specific muscle.
Right, and that's why, twice when I've been squatting is when I fucked my back up, because it's slow and controlled down, but I was not taking the weight for the weakest part of my movement, which was, I would get a butt wink. And a butt wink's not necessarily bad, but for the weight that I had on the bar, for how slow I was going, for the control that I was doing. As soon as I got down and my butt winked, my back slipped.
Yep.
So if I would have done that with, one less plate on each side, there would have been no injury. So it's not like I didn't have the control, but it's that load tolerance at that point.
All right. Should we get into some questions here?
Fuck yeah.
All right. Let's do it.
Question 1. I see a lot of people elevate their heels in a squat. What are the benefits of doing that?
So I actually have a decent amount of my clients elevate their heels when they squat. Not all of them, but a decent amount. It's interesting. We actually just read a study in the last month or so that was showing that the squat kinematics, or like your joint sequencing through movement, isn't much different with your heels elevated. The difference is actually negligible. So if we're talking like muscle activation, I was always under the impression, and here's the thing, we can look at the immediate cause and effect, but we can also look at the secondary and tertiary effects of doing something. So people say, okay, well, when you elevate your heels, it gives you a little bit more quad activation, but that doesn't necessarily mean your quads will grow more because you do that. And that is true, but it might put you in a better position to where you can squat with your chest a little bit more upright, which is going to be a little bit better for longevity. So when you elevate the heels, you minimize the need for ankle dorsiflexion, which means your knee traveling forward over your toes. A lot of times you get to a point where for your knees to get any more further forward, you would have to come up off of your heels, and you put yourself in a lot weaker position when you do that. It's not necessarily dangerous because there's literally a variation of a squat called the sissy squat where you intentionally come off your heels onto your toes and your hips kind of drift forward and your upper body is almost kind of leaning back. But obviously we don't want to do that with a barbell. So with the heels being elevated, allows you to keep the chest more upright, and it minimizes the need for ankle dorsiflexion. So the knees can travel more forward, and that way the reason the upper body can stay more upright is because that barbell has to stay over the center of your foot. And if it drifts back, you're going to fall backwards. And if it drifts too far forward, you're either going to have a squat morning or that bar is going to roll up your neck and over your head. So keeping your torso more upright will allow you to get more bend out of the knees as well as the ankles. And that is what can get you a little bit more quads when you squat. So I like this a lot for people who either just have really bad ankle mobility or for someone who is trying to target their quads a little bit more. Now, if you want to grow your quads, it's not as simple as like, oh, just throw some plates under your heels and you can get more quads out of your squat. You probably also need to be picking exercises a little bit more intelligently. Like if your main goal wasn't strength and you were wanting to grow your quads, I wouldn't have barbell back squat be your main movement. I'd probably have you do a hack squat or a leg press or a Bulgarian split squat where you can get a little bit more out of your quads, because once the weight starts getting heavy on squats, it's a lot harder to keep your form solid and really stay in your quads. And I'd even say the same for split squats. I think split squats are probably a better glute movement than they are quad movement. Still think they're a great quad movement, but I would say look into other variations and ways of programming if you really want to grow your quads. But if you have trouble with your torso leaning way forward in your squat, try throwing some plates under your heels and really focus on pushing your knees forward and watch how much better your squat feels and looks.
I mean, that's literally one of the only times, and I have most of my clients doing heel elevated goblet squats because of the ankle mobility or the lack thereof, where again, a lot of people, and I fell into this camp for at least a year and a half where, oh, I can't get below parallel because my hips are super tight. You know, I did hip mobility for like a year and a half to 2 years, and my squat didn't really improve. I did ankle mobility for about 3 weeks, and all of a sudden I was able to get below parallel. So it's one of those things I like to show my clients, yes, it's not in your hips, it's in your ankles. So we will be doing heel elevated goblet squats while we work on our ankle mobility until we can get into that full range of motion squat without the heels elevated. Because I look at it as it's more beneficial to train that full range of motion using that Band-Aid of the elevated heels to get into that full range of motion squat than it would be to just, go to where you're at while we're working on ankle mobility.
Question 2. Should I take creatine if I'm trying to lose weight?
Yes. I think everyone, okay, let me rephrase that. I think the majority of people should take creatine the majority of the time. One of the biggest misconceptions with creatine is the bloat. Creatine will retain water in the body, but it's not what you think it is. Creatine actually pulls water into the muscle cells, and it essentially makes your muscles look more full. So when you're trying to lose weight, yeah, if you stop taking creatine, you might lose 1 to 3 pounds, but that's basically going to make your muscles just look more flat. It's not that extracellular water that's like kind of underneath the skin that makes you look bloated. And the reason I say you should still be taking creatine, yeah, you could lose the couple of pounds maybe, but the benefits you get from creatine with resistance training are going to allow you to essentially burn more fat in the long term if you continue to take creatine.
And I think the other huge benefit of it is the performance benefits, because in a fat loss phase, the two main things that we're looking for to retain muscle is going to be protein intake and resistance training. And when I say resistance training, I mean to be specific, is to retain your strength, or in the best case scenario, to continue to gain strength. With creatine, it's a performance enhancing supplement. So when you take it, you're going to be stronger. When your blood levels are what we call creatine saturated, you're going to have an increase in performance. And that's super helpful if we're trying to retain strength. So that's going to help you lose more fat and less muscle. So most of the weight you're losing can be fat. I think the other thing too is when you get leaner, you have to get, probably sub 6% to notice a difference in like if you look bloated. If you're trying to get down to even like 8% as a guy, like really lean, or even like 18-20% as a woman, you're going to look leaner if you're taking creatine because your muscles look more full, especially when you got leaner towards the end of your show. I remember we were talking and you were looking in the mirror and you're like, dude, I look flat right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to happen whether you're on creatine or not as you get lean. And so if you're taking creatine, it can help you avoid that kind of look of like flatness where, yeah, you look lean, but your muscles don't they're not sticking out that much. Take creatine. Seriously, take it whether you're trying to lose weight or put on muscle. And I think most of the times when they're like, oh, well, I feel bloated when I take it, more often than not, the people that I get that from are people who are in a muscle building phase. And so it's like, well, you would be bloated whether or not you're taking creatine because you have a lot more food content in your gut. So you're going to feel a little bit bloated, and that's normal.
It's not the creatine that's making you bloated. It's something else in the diet.
It's the food.
Also, and I get this question a lot, whether or not you should cycle on and off of creatine and or do the loading phase. I could see some benefits for the loading phase once. I think you're just kind of like dumping that extra creatine out the window. I don't think you necessarily need a loading phase, but with the cycling on and off, that comes from the steroid community where you need to cycle on and off of steroids. Your body naturally produces creatine. You take too much of it, you piss it out. Your body will not start to produce less of it just because you're constantly taking it. So there is absolutely no need to cycle on and off.
Yeah, there's no long-term effects. A lot of people were worried about their liver, if creatine was not good for their liver. There's been a lot of research that has debunked that idea, so we don't need to worry about our liver. And some other people worry about hair loss. There was an observational study in rugby players that noticed that people that took creatine were losing their hair. And the more research we've gotten on that, there's nothing to worry about when it comes to hair loss. And the loading phase too, it's not necessary. You might get creatine saturated a little bit earlier, but maybe instead of reaching full creatine saturation at 3 weeks, maybe it's like 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. And the amount of, you'd have to take like 15 to 20 grams a day, I think it is, in a loading phase. And you do that for like a week, and then you start just doing 3 to 5 grams a day. I would just take 3 to 5 grams a day. You'll start noticing a difference in about 3 weeks in performance. And then over time, as you continue to lean out, you'll notice that you're able to keep your strength as you get leaner. And it makes your cut a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable, because I don't know about you, but there's nothing to me that sucks worse than, as I'm getting leaner, I'm also getting weaker. When, like, if I'm going to 15% body fat to 10%, I shouldn't lose strength.
No.
If I go from 10 to 6%, that's a different story.
I didn't start losing strength until I got, well into the single digits. And I did not stop taking creatine until we went to Vegas, because I just didn't bring any. Question 3. I'm terrible at pull-ups. Could doing some pull-ups every day increase my proficiency? If so, how many would you recommend per day?
Yeah, doing pull-ups every day absolutely could increase your proficiency. That's something I did when I was either like a senior in high school or a freshman in college. I had to have been a senior. And what I would do is I'd set my pull-up bar outside my room, and I would go and I'd do, like, every time I walked through that door, I'd do a pull-up. And then I started doing like 2 pull-ups a day, or 2 pull-ups at a time, right? And over time, I was doing about like 10 pull-ups a day. And then I started trying to put them together in one set. So I'd do like 3 pull-ups, and I'd do maybe 2 to 3 sets a day. And I would do them to where I felt like I still had a decent amount of reps left in me, because I was doing them every day. So, like, imagine if I was going to tell you, I want you to squat 7 days a week. Most people would look at you and be like, you are a psychopath. But then if I said, okay, we're going to take 50% of your 1 rep max, and you're only going to do 3 reps. So if your 1 rep max on a back squat is 200, we're going to take 50% and we're going to do 3 reps and do that for 1 set every day. You'd be like, that's easy as hell, especially considering you can do about 75% of your 1 rep max for 10 to 12 reps. So I would say and you don't need to be that sub-maximal with your pull-ups, but I just wanted to give an example of why, however long you need between days of doing a specific exercise or working a specific muscle, it really depends on how hard you're pushing that muscle. So what I would do is I would find out how many pull-ups you can do in a row. So if you can only do 1, then I would start with that method of doing 1 every few hours. And then over time, maybe do 2 every few hours. And once you can get about 5 in a row, then I'd start doing like 2 to 3 sets of anywhere between 3 and 5, depending on how hard those 5 reps are. And then over time, you get a little bit better and a little bit better. And then you can just start doing them on your back days. If you want to do a set of 10 pull-ups, that's how I got better at them. That's how a lot of my clients have gotten better at them. I personally love this way of getting better at pull-ups. It's a very unconventional technique compared to most weightlifting programs, and a lot of research would show that doesn't seem optimal, but I found that that's a hell of a lot quicker than doing what we call quote-unquote optimal. There's not many studies that take people and have them do a push-up or a pull-up every single day, because where is the profit in that? There's no money to be made, so why the hell would anyone fund that study?
Well, and I look at this, I'm going to use like tanning for an example. At the beginning of the summer, we live in Chicago, it's winter for like 8 months of the year. If on day 1, when it was nice out, if we just went outside in our swimsuit and laid out for 8 hours, we would get absolutely fried, sunburn. We'd have to stay inside for a very long time, let the sunburn come back down. If we were to take it, I'm going to go on a 5-minute walk outside. Don't need to throw sunscreen on. Go outside, 5-minute walk, come back inside, get some stuff done, go back out an hour or 2 later, 5 minutes, a little bit. So instead of getting that super high stimulus, it's that drip effect where it's like you're getting a little bit more sun and your body's now able to handle a little bit more sun. Next week, 10 minutes. Like I don't do sunscreen very often because I'm not outside long enough for the sun to burn me. But those little bits and pieces allow my skin to kind of adapt to the sun. So unless I'm going to be outside for an extended period of time, I don't put sunscreen on. I did this in high school with bench press. I was kind of at a plateau for a while, and my strength coach, me and him had a super good relationship. He's like, if you ever want to come, in between classes, come in here, do a set of bench press. We're going to keep it super light, super sub-maximal, 3 to 5 reps. We're going to rack it. You're going to go back to class, come back, do it again. Within that 4 to 6 week period, my bench press skyrocketed because of that drip effect of I'm sending this signal to my body that, okay, it's not super strenuous, but I'm enough to send that muscle building signal and practice that skill even more so I could become more proficient at it, and I was able to do more. I have most of my clients that want to get better at pull-ups. I'd say about half of them will go and buy a pull-up bar and give it a couple months, and they're going from 0 pull-ups to 10 pull-ups. Like, it is one of those things that you do it and it will work. The literature right now, like you said, does not support that, but it's that anecdote, that bro science-y kind of approach to it. It fucking works.
Yep. Half science, half bro science.
5-year plan.
Yep. There's t-shirts.
Yep.
Bro science plus real science equals science.
Equals science.
Or gains. Bro science plus science equals gains.
I mean, we're probably going to have these t-shirts in like 2 weeks.
Yeah. 100% money back guarantee. And since that idea is free, there's 0 money back. But that's fine. Thank you for watching this episode of 5-Year Plan. If you like what we're doing here on the show, be sure to like and subscribe.
If you want one of your questions answered on a future podcast, you can write into our website at www.5yearplanmedia.com, or you can write into our Instagram page at 5yearplanmedia. You can find me on Instagram at @Z_Condon.
And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at ConnorYoungman_.
Peace.
See ya.